if I put it at the feet of three companies, it's Nissan, it's Tesla, and oddly it's VW, because the Dieselgate issues.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a very chilly February 16th here in the Northeast. I'm Eric Planey.
Hi, I'm Lucas Finko.
And I'm Andy Palmer.
And together, transatlantically today, we are the Pirates of Clean Tech.
Yar. Yes.
I don't know, that was pretty weak, Andy. We got to work on your pirate.
I've never heard a pirate going yar. Must be an American thing.
There's probably geographic demarcation of pirate languages. Well, this is a big treat for Lucas and I. This is we've been wanting to have you on, Andy, for quite some time as a guest. I've been a big fan of yours since you took the helm at Aston Martin, I think 6-7 years ago.
Just over 6 years ago, yeah.
But you really are a titan of the auto industry. And we thought we'd start off with a little bit, because most of our listeners probably know of you from Aston Martin, but really may not know about your experience with, I think, 23 years you were at Nissan. And you did some incredible things there, including a vehicle called the Nissan Leaf. So why don't you give us a little background for our listeners about your automotive career, and then we'll get a little bit further into your the Nissan Leaf project.
Well, then you come to a real history lesson, because suddenly you go from being the young guy in the industry to suddenly being old. But I'm just over 41 years in the auto industry. So I left school when I was 15, and I started what's called an apprenticeship when I was 16, a 4-year apprenticeship. And basically that was in mechanical engineering, at a company called Automotive Products. So I came out of my apprenticeship in their advanced engineering, doing what was early prototypes of dual clutch transmissions. Weren't very useful then, because it was sort of on that cusp of going from analog electronics to digital electronics, and it wasn't quite mastered. But it was nevertheless, it's where I fell in love with gearboxes, and we can talk about my love for clocks and watches later in the podcast maybe. But I sort of, since 14 years old, wanted to be in the car industry. I wanted to be an engineer in the car industry, and the fastest way from A to B was basically to take an apprenticeship. At the age of 21, late 20s, early 21, I came out of my apprenticeship and into a world which was not in great shape, to be honest. The auto industry in the UK was in pretty bad shape. There was all the British Leyland wildcat strikes. There was the tension between Mrs. Thatcher and Arthur Scargill, and all of that was going on. And as all 20-year-olds, I was arrogant and thought I could do this better, and sort of set this goal of wanting to be a chief executive in the auto industry at some point in the future. I made it, surprisingly, but the dream was arrogant. But I went away and I got myself educated. So I did it all part-time. I started by doing a bachelor's in management at Coventry University, night times and basically weekends. I used that to get my first job in what was then called Austin Rover Morris, part of the British Leyland Group. Was lucky enough to get into a fast track of management there, and became ultimately head of transmissions for Rover. And they were good enough to put me through a part-time master's degree in engineering. So it deepens my knowledge of engineering. That time, Rover Group, because it changed its name from Austin Rover to Rover, Rover Group was had a relationship with Honda. And I was always taken by the fact that the Honda cars were so much better than the Rover cars, even though they were fundamentally the same chassis. And I also read a book called The Machine That Changed the World, which was born out of MIT. And I figured if I needed to understand what these Japanese folk were doing, because they were doing it much better than me, and I could learn it, steal it, and bring it back. And so I decided to join. Headhunters helped, but I decided to join Nissan. And as I thought for a few years, ended up being 23 years. But I started as in the engineering department of Nissan in Europe. I eventually became head of engineering in Europe. And then, of course, the Renault-Nissan alliance or takeover, or whatever you want to call it, happened. I was lucky enough to get spotted by Ghosn. The company, in the meantime, had sponsored me through a PhD, sponsored me through an MBA. So I was pretty stacked up on qualifications. And then I had the business opportunity, and Ghosn gave me the business opportunity. And I was 13 years in Nissan in Japan, and eventually rose up to be the number 2, to be the chief operating officer of Nissan. And what I think is probably the most important moment of my career which was this opportunity to take some nascent EV technology that was sitting in the R&D department and turn that into what became the Nissan Leaf, and that whole project of Leaf with the battery factory in 3 locations, working with NEC, establishing AESC, was really an important part of my career there. But it wasn't CEO. And that was that 20-year-old's dream was the CEO job. And it was pretty clear I wasn't going to make CEO, because it didn't look like Ghosn was going anywhere soon. And of course, I didn't know about the musical box at that stage. And Aston came along and said, you know, do you want to be chief executive of Aston Martin? And I thought, wow, Aston Martin, that's a fabulous brand. It's 5 miles down the road from where I went to school, and somehow or other, my experiences, I thought, had prepared me to go there. And so I did that, and I did that for 6 years. Left last May, change of ownership, as you know, at Aston. We have somewhat different views of which direction the company should go. That's okay. And basically coming out of there, I've sort of decided to go back to that route in zero emissions and start to build probably the twilight of my career around doing things in the not just zero emissions, but net carbon zero space. Because 15 years ago, we were talking about zero tailpipe emissions. Now I think we have to take into account not only the carbon that's produced in manufacturing the vehicles, but also carbon at end of life and carbon in the upstream. Yeah. So I think that's humanity's challenge right now is basically getting to a point where you're not having an impact on Mother Earth, but at the same time you're able to offer to the new generation the mobility joys that I had as a kid.
Very interesting, Andy. So I'm hoping we can get right to it right away. Let's talk about the Nissan Leaf. I'm wondering if you could take us through kind of the business decision going on in the C-suite. You know, I've read Bob Lutz's book. I've heard his story about the colored paper and stuff like this. And I just feel like a lot of auto executives are already sold, and they've been sold on gasoline as the fuel. So how does that discussion go in the C-suite?
It was a tough discussion, and it was a tough discussion not only through the formation of the strategy, but there was a lot of naysayers in the C-suite, even through the launch and production. There was a lot of people in C-suite and below that were keen to kill off the Nissan Leaf, not because they didn't necessarily like the car, but because it didn't make any money. And you have a certain impatience. I mean, one only needs to read the stories around the Toyota Prius. It was not until the 3rd generation of the Prius that it started to make money. Mm-hmm. And businesses tend not to be patient. Mm-hmm. You know what? I'll give you an example of that. You won't even remember this car. There was a Nissan Tino. It was the sister vehicle of the Nissan Almera. I did my PhD around the Almera, so I have a certain weak spot for it. But the Tino was a C-segment crossover vehicle, like an MPV. That car was the first hybrid. No one remembers it because Nissan didn't carry it forward. It was impatient, and it wasn't making money, and didn't therefore have the patience to stick with it. On the other hand, Toyota did with Prius, and to be fair to them, they made a brand almost as big with Prius as they had with Toyota. Leaf was, as head of product planning at the time, Leaf was born out of, okay, we missed the hybrid bus. We missed that one. What do we do to compete with the Prius and the hybrids, which of course in the domestic market were doing so well? And of course, many of my colleagues would have said, just make us another Prius. And my point was, you know what, if you make another Prius, you're just another you're just another hybrid. It's not going to mark you out as a brand. And I would argue that can be seen to be true when you look at the route that Honda went on. So we were looking for something different to differentiate Nissan and to live the brand identity of innovation that excites. So, you know, it implies basically you innovate to start with, and that's exciting. And that's what drove us down the route of the electric car. You can retrospectively commentate around Ghosn and whether he was good, bad, or indifferent. What I can say with absolute confidence is that Leaf lived because of the air cover that Ghosn gave. Because I'm sure if I'd carried that project through on my own shoulders, there was enough people around the C-suite that would have absolutely killed it off, because you just look at the numbers and you go, that doesn't make any money, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So credit to Ghosn, you know, he had the confidence to stick with it and give me the air cover that I needed to get that car into production. And I think it goes down in history, therefore. Both, I mean, as you know, it was launched before the Tesla S, and a long time before the Tesla X. So it definitely sat in that first mass production EV, and for a long time it was selling more cars by itself than the rest of the EV market combined.
Yeah.
Regrettably, Nissan didn't keep investing. Same old story, I'm afraid. And therefore, to some extent, lost that position. I hope they can recover it. But that was the story. Yes, it was not a popular program. It had a few big advocates, but most importantly, it had the air cover of Ghosn.
You know, Andy, before I get to my next question, I want to touch on what you said about history, because Lucas and I were talking about this over the weekend. You know, here in the States, obviously, everyone talks about Tesla being the catalyst. But when I think about the Nissan Leaf, I really, and this is a compliment coming from an American, I really think that history will judge the Nissan Leaf as the Model T of electric vehicles, because it was a vehicle that really had global ambition from day one and was recognized, and I believe sold globally very early on in its development. And I think people are going to recognize that. This was a car that gave accessibility to the general population to buy an electric vehicle. And I think that's what history will judge Nissan on.
I hope so, and Nissan deserves it, because it was a brave decision, and it was a program that started with the base concept of bringing electric cars to the masses. So we viewed the battery as if it was a perpetually full fuel tank, and then everything else about the car needed to be competitive with an internal combustion car. And you know, I hear people now talking about the rollout of EVs, and they're too expensive. Well, if we all making an expensive Tesla S, for example, wasn't easy, but it was a heck of a lot easier than making a mid-size C-segment vehicle. I think it deserves, set aside my own personal involvement in it, I think Nissan deserves credit for basically at least delivering to market the first feasible mass production vehicle. Tesla deserves a lot of credit for having patience and perseverance, basically to keep on going when the going got tough, and I did that in spades. And I think the acceleration of electric cars is, you know, if I put it at the feet of three companies, you know, it's Nissan, it's Tesla, and oddly it's VW, because the Dieselgate issues accelerated the need to get towards EVs. So those three companies together are really important in that history book.
Oh, that's really interesting on Nissan, VW. I thought you were going to say BMW, because I felt like when they came out with the i8 and the i3, there's a lot of followers of BMW, I think, in at least in the US OEMs. So, but your point about VW is dead on, especially from a charging aspect here in the States.
Yeah,
it's a big deal. Let me ask you this, and this is kind of a good segue from what you talked about. When you look at the numbers for 2020, there are 2.5 million EVs sold globally. Europe itself was up 137% in EV sales in 2020. it seems like we're getting to that point where mass adoption is taking place. But talk a little bit more about what you need to see happen in the next few years in terms of either battery cost, range, policy. What will be the real catalyst to take a very nice baseline, but to really accelerate it so you have just substantial growth in the next 5 years?
Well, look, we're getting there. We've gone past the knee point. We've gone past that point of no return, I believe. There's a whole bunch of things that help us get there. Of course, governments calling time on internal combustion engines, by 2030, 2035, basically saying we don't want any more internal combustion engines. I don't think everything about global policy is correct. I don't think that you should just simply say EV. I don't know about the US government, but the UK government and the European governments don't have a good track record, particularly when they forced everybody down the route of diesel ultimately being not a great technology for air cleanliness. But I think basically setting out at least the necessity to get to zero emissions and eventually net zero is the role of government. I also think that government needs to ensure that charging network is in place, because this doesn't work if you don't have those chargers. And then I think it's down to engineers and scientists, because in my experience, things work best if you're working in a world of Darwinism. So, for example, the rollout of the Nissan Leaf in North America was very much in competition with the GM Volt. And it was helpful because if you remember, every month everybody was comparing the Volt sales to the Nissan sales. What they forgot to take, of course, was that Leaf was sold everywhere else in the world. So Leaf was way ahead. But in the American market, it was a kind of head-to-head competition. That was healthy. The same, I would say, is true in other zero-emission technology. I think it's really important that we explore the boundaries of hydrogen. I don't think necessarily hydrogen is always the right solution. It's hard to get green hydrogen. It's really expensive. However, fuel cells in principle are not a bad solution. Likewise, synthetic fuel is not a bad solution. Where it comes out, look, if you ask me as a commentator, I'd say almost all cars in 2035 will be electric. But at the heavy end of the market, heavy trucks, maybe fuel cell is a better solution. In the area of the emerging area of flying cars and drones, or even in the area of luxury sports cars, maybe synthetic fuel is better. Where the boundaries go is where you let the engineers work and where you let the consumers play with the Darwinism model, and the Darwinism model will kill off the worst technologies and select the fittest. And I think that's really important. If you push everything down just the pure EV, you won't get the best from the science. So certainly in the governments that will listen to me, I'll say, basically define the problem. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then let the engineers come with the solutions, and there'll be a wide variety of solutions. Let them play out. Let that be the Betamax versus VHS. I'm showing my age. Let the market decide, the consumer decide which one they like better, because that will undoubtedly be the stronger one. And as I say, my expectation is that most cars will end up being electric. There may be a few cases where you're looking for longer range, where you can't quite get the batteries there, and there you've got the choices of hydrogen, even in-cylinder hydrogen combustion fuel cells, and synthetic fuels. And I think that makes the whole discussion richer and better.
Well, you're preaching to the choir, because if you look at this is our third season now, and we are 100% behind you that you need all the above type solutions, especially since we have a target of maintaining core temperature and low, by 2 degrees centigrade by 2050. One technology is not going to get you there. So, and what I like about what your statement is, when you look at your career now, and I believe your website is palmerautomotive.co. When I look at what you're doing now, you're kind of putting your money where your mouth is, as we say, because you're really involved in many different automotive technology companies that are really intriguing to look at. Can you talk a little bit about what you were involved now in terms of company development and technology development?
Yeah, some I can, some I can't. So Palmer Automotive is an umbrella company. So it allows me to do a variety of different things, and I have to say I'm really enjoying the breadth of coverage. So first and foremost is a company called Switch, which is a company born out of the EV part of Ashok Leyland in India and the EV part of Optare in the United Kingdom, and it's being pulled together into a new company called Switch, and basically it's looking at electric buses and electric vans. So let's call it the last 1 mile as an interesting area. But you can see that basically with global coverage. So it's a really interesting, and if there was one area of the market, that the auto market, where BEV, battery electric vehicle, really makes complete sense over any other technology, it's buses, because buses do the same route every day. Almost to to the mile how many miles it's going to do. Therefore, you can optimize the size of the battery, and the charging and the driving, and you can get to the lowest possible cost of ownership with almost no impact on Mother Earth. So top amongst my it should go EV isn't an SUV or a sports car, it's actually a bus. And interestingly, if you look, I'll take Westminster, because Westminster is in the middle of London, so it's the city that I know most about. 50% of the particulates in downtown London come from buses and taxis. So if you really care about asthma in kids and stuff like that, and you really want to clean it up really quick, turn the taxis and the buses into EVs, because suddenly they're not putting any pollutants into the air, and there you have a really quick win really quickly. And I suppose if it works for London, it probably works for most cities around the world. So that's the first project I'm working on. Second project is as vice chairman of a company called Innobat, which is a battery company. It's a Slovakian battery company, but interestingly has a collaboration agreement with a Californian company called Wildcat. And what I like about that company is that it develops its own battery technology, so it's able to push the boundaries of the chemistry, and that journey of from where I started with carbon-based batteries all the way to where we are today, and eventually to the solid state battery. So that's really interesting. I'm also chairman of a EV scooter company called Hilo. Again, down to that last mile, we've got to change the way that we move in cities. And part of that is taking down the size of the footprint of the vehicles. So in many respects, there's no better way of getting around a city than on a bicycle or a scooter. And obviously to make that more efficient, you make it EV, and that becomes a really interesting business model. So I'm helping and investing in that company with the hope that it'll be successful. And then I've got other odd projects, including advising, for example, the RAF, which is our Royal Air Force, on their journey to net zero. So I'm really having a lot of fun, actually. It's been an interesting journey so far, but it's getting more interesting by the day and busier.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very cool to see the different kinds of projects that you're involved in. But I wanted to ask a slightly different question. Do you feel that there's room enough in the industry for traditional OEMs and new startups? It's getting kind of crowded. There's news about Apple Car now. Are people actually going to buy an Apple Car? There's rumors every day about them teaming with an existing auto company. How do you see this playing out?
We're in a period of great turbulence. I would say that this is as interesting as the period when the horse gave way to the car or the carriage. And I think you're going to see a lot of turbulence, and certainly most of the startups will fail, and certainly a good number of the existing OEMs will fail. And the way that they survive, there will be mergers and acquisitions for sure. You'll probably end up with not a dissimilar number of of mobility companies on the other side of the disruption as you have today. But in between, you've got these new entrants coming in. As I say, some of them will team up, which appears to be the Apple strategy. Some of them will start from new, which appears to, well, is the Tesla strategy, and others, which I won't name, will almost certainly fail. But likewise, some of the existing OEMs that are not quick enough to pivot will also fail as a result. So it really is a mixed up period of time. I actually think it's the best time to live through, because it's just so exciting what's going on, and you really are getting whilst cars still have four wheels, everything else about cars has really changed.
Yeah, indeed. I also wanted to talk about you've called for the UK to have its own gigafactory. You've called for more innovation in the UK in the battery space. I wonder if you could talk about what are some of the challenges there. I know Britain has a long history of creating innovative automobiles. And so what is happening now, and where does the UK need to go? What do they need to do?
I have to watch my language here, because I've always the history of automotive making in the UK and what's happened over a long period of time really upsets me. If we go back to the 50s, as I'm sure you know, the UK was number 2 in the rankings in terms of countries that made cars. The US was the largest, thanks to your Mr. Ford. If we look now, the UK is 16th below the Czech Republic, and I don't mean to demean the Czech Republic. It just shows, when you step back and you look, basically the UK is now making less than 1% of the total number of cars made in the world. And of course, you've seen, China becoming number 1. I get really upset that that's been allowed to happen. That the UK has taken a kind of laissez-faire view to the auto industry, a hands-off approach where it's let companies die or survive based upon their own capability, whilst around the world, other countries have had quite big intervention into saving their auto industry. Why? Because we employ a lot of people, right? Well, you only have to look at what happened during Lehman shock and the way that the US government stepped into Chrysler and GM, for example, or the French government into Peugeot and Renault, or the Japanese government into Nissan. The playing fields aren't level, and part of that is had a really negative effect on automaking in the UK over that sort of 30-40 year period. My point to my government is, as we pivot to electric vehicles, you have to make batteries close to the auto plants. Batteries are very heavy, they're very bulky, and they're very expensive. You can't afford to have a battery for 6 weeks sitting on a boat, coming from one end of the world to the other, because you've got a lot of stock inventory tied up. So you need them close. Through the Brexit agreement, what you've seen is that Europe's saying we need our own batteries. Therefore, if you want to sell vehicles in Europe without tariffs, you have to have a certain level of local content. And that means that basically that Europe is now trying to attract battery company investment in Europe, which is in direct competition to the UK. But Europe is putting a lot of incentives behind bringing those people there. And my point to the UK government is, if you don't put incentives, you know what? They won't come here. And you know what? If they don't come to the UK, then as you move from an internal combustion engine to an electric platform, that's a new platform. And those new platforms will move to places where the batteries are. So in other words, that 1% of the worldwide manufacturing footprint that you have in the UK will disappear, along with the 823,000 jobs, unless you do something. So I'm being, as you read the stuff, I'm being a little bit alarmist, partly out of frustration of what's happened over the last 40 years, but partly out of a fear that my kids' generation won't have the same opportunities to train in engineering and enjoy an industry that I've enjoyed, simply because we haven't leveled the playing fields, and we need to.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of your efforts here. I think I look at my hometown in Ohio, which is actually building the LG GM Ultium battery plant right next door to a former GM factory that was shuttered this year, but is actually now beginning to make electric trucks for fleets, Lordstown Motors. You have to make that effort. And there were incentives put on the table for GM to come back. And I 100% agree with you. The battery is a very important component to make. And if you don't have that type of fortitude as a government to go and really, break some initiative, get there to bring the battery to a gigafactory to the UK, you're really in jeopardy of losing a lot of jobs. And I really applaud you for that effort, because I would be 100% behind you if I were in the UK.
Well, I'd love to think that as I sort of walk into the sunset, that there is an industry in the UK which is at least as healthy as the one that I walked into. And remember, the one that I walked into wasn't particularly healthy, but at least there was one. And I certainly hope that when I walk out that we've got something better than that. But got to have batteries.
I agree. I tell you what, we have one more question for you, and we really ask this of all our guests. Lucas and I found out that our average listener is in their late 20s. They're really beginning their career. You talked a little bit about the initiative that you took to get into the auto industry. You always had that point, that vision. We're walking into a period of disruption, as you mentioned. If somebody is graduating college, they really want to be involved in the auto or really mobility industry, what should they be looking to do to really break into it right now?
The industry's changed a lot from when I started, of course, but if you take the discipline of engineering, for example, in those days you were either a production engineer or a mechanical engineer. Now, of course, you've got electrical engineering, software engineering, and you need, I don't think there's a mechanical part on the car that doesn't have somehow a circuit board associated with it. So as engineers, you need to be much more rounded. You need a knowledge of everything. And I think that's kind of makes engineering more interesting. Auto industry, look, I've always encouraged people to build a deep foundation. So it's very easy to bull your way through a career, but eventually you're going to get found out. I always found that to spend a little bit more time, start that promotion cycle a little bit later, but get some depth in your career, because the benefit of depth, and for me that was having worked on the shop floor during my apprenticeship for 4 years, to coin an English phrase, what you learn is you learn to know where the bodies are buried. You learn intuitively to know what's really going on, and you learn empathy. You learn how to talk to people and see how people see things, looking up from the bottom rather than looking down from the top. And I think empathy with people is really, really important, particularly when you want them to do tough stuff. So deep foundation in your chosen discipline, be it sales and marketing, be it engineering, be it accounting, but get some good roots, because that will pay off in the long term. And then my experience is there's in the industry, there's always lots and lots of very clever people. But what I tell my kids is basically work. Really put your full attention into things, work harder than anybody else. Don't take anything for granted. Really make sure that you put quality around what you do. Spend the extra hour. Yes, you might miss out on a pint at the pub, but don't worry, you'll catch up before the end of the evening. But get that quality right, get that depth right, and work. And that hard work, real gritty effort will always trump IQ, because you're putting your heart and soul into it. So, basically, if you want to reach the top, it doesn't come easy. There will be sacrifices, and you'll miss a few beers over your life, but you'll be a lot better off for it.
It's good to get your fingernails dirty every now and then.
It is indeed.
Lucas, any last comments on your end?
No, that was great. I would have the same advice, right? So that's really good to hear it from you, and I hope our listeners take heart at that. So it was great to have you on, Andy. This was great.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I have to tell you. So October of 2019 was my last international trip. It was to London. I was attending a one-day seminar on the European electric vehicle industry. I happened to send you a tweet, Andy, to see if I can get a tour of Aston Martin. Not only did I get a tour, but I had a personal tour by a gentleman named Cameron, who walked me around the whole factory. I mean, I spent my share of swag at your gift shop. Absolutely loved it, and Aston is still a dream of mine. And maybe I'll find. I don't know if they sold the EV version of the Rapide in the US. I can't.
No, it never. It got the Rapide got to full development sign off, but was never industrialized, unfortunately.
Oh, that's too bad, because that would have been a great one. But
I'm sure that there's an EV somewhere in their future, so something to look out for.
something, or maybe one day when the prices on the 70s Vantage come down, which I don't think will ever happen. This is really a big pleasure. You really covered a lot of ground on the emerging mobility and auto industry. Maybe in the future, we'd love to have you back and get a little bit of a progress report on a few things.
Be my pleasure. Anytime.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Andy Palmer. I know I'm not allowed to call you doctor, but I think I just did. Thank you for everything, and looking forward to seeing the development of your companies that you oversee right now.
Look forward to talking to you again. Bye-bye now.
Many thanks. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know about you, Lucas, but that was fantastic. Andy was everything I hoped he would be, and about 10 times more. Just really did a deep dive into today's emerging auto industry, changing auto industry, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I mean, he did an awesome job answering our questions to give us some amazing insight. I know I've been really itching to talk to a high-level auto exec to see what goes on in their meetings, and to hear him kind of confirm what I thought was really powerful. So it was really important for me to talk to him and hear what he had to say. So he really delivered.
It's funny because I spent some time in the UK. I got to work there for a month a couple years ago. I was so happy about that. It was a check the box type of moment in my life. I'm all in. He's going to have trouble getting a gigafactory, and I actually tweeted this to him after the story broke. There's not one major OEM that can drive its own gigafactory right now, like a Tesla in Germany, a GM in Ohio, etc. But I think he needs to make that effort, and we'll talk about this in one of the articles, but maybe he has to create the ecosystem for batteries in the UK, and that's a starting point. That's going to be hard to do. It really is going to be hard to do, but I think there's something to be said about really pushing to have a gigafactory in the UK. I totally believe it. The UK did a great job of reinvigorating the auto industry by bringing a Nissan plant, a Honda plant, to the UK after all the major British manufacturers really fell by the wayside. Jaguar's still there, Aston Martin's still there, Land Rover's still there. Rolls, I believe, is still making them in the UK. They have foreign ownership, but they're still there. But they need to really kind of coalesce around that in order to pull it into Giga. So I wish them all the best, and I hope we have them on again.
Yeah. So, and guys too, if you don't know, guys and gals, if you don't know my Bob Lutz reference, you can check out his book, Car Guys versus Bean Counters. He's an old GM executive. He tells this story about how he pitched the CEO of GM on some new car, and he brought the presentation up to the executive suite, and the CEO's project manager, whatever, was like, "Oh, no, this is all wrong." And he was like, "What?" And the guy was like, "The CEO wants it a certain way. The financials have to be printed on green paper. The marketing has to be printed on yellow paper." So he grabbed he did all this stuff in some back room. And that was the reference I was making, that I really feel like there's all this craziness and other stuff that's totally not related to the core decision that these people need to make in these meetings. And so that's why I wanted to know, like, what was it really like in that meeting about the Nissan Leaf?
That's a great book. That's a great book. And I also read The Machine That Changed the World. I think I have it 5 feet away in my bookcase. It's a fantastic book. It's still very relevant right now. But it gets crazy when the accountants take over from the engineering design. People don't believe this, but the Pontiac Aztek, one of the ugliest SUVs at the time, which is now retro cool looking. If people saw it, the prototype was ridiculously slick looking. It looked so modern. And then when the accountants got hold of it, they said, "You're not creating an all new chassis. you have to build this on the existing minivan chassis. It just looks like a behemoth, but that's true. That's in the book. It's really, really sad. So,
Okay.
All right, listen, before we get to our articles, we couldn't do this in the beginning of our show because we had to tape the Andy segment lunchtime US time. So we thought better hold off on our beers. But we got some fantastic ones. Lucas, why don't you go first?
Yeah, okay. I went down to Fort Nonsense Brewing on Route 10 here in New Jersey, and I got myself a Arnold's Tavern Porter, which is delicious. Filled it up in my growler for me. Please support your local brewery. Yeah.
Wow. So I haven't had a good porter in a while. So I talk about all the microbrews in the Hudson Valley. Well, let's go right to the heart of it. I went to Hudson Valley Brewery in Beacon, New York. We'll have their website on our tags. They ship, so they will ship beers. But because in honor of our kind of brunch time filming, I have a blueberry oatmeal stout. That is a brunch style sour IPA with oats, blueberries, and maple syrup. It is fantastic. It's a fantastic celebration IPA.
What's a brunch style beer? I never heard of this.
Because it's got blueberries, maple syrup, and oats.
Oh my god!
I think I'm allowed to have this for breakfast tomorrow.
Okay. Okay. Me too. Wow.
Well, we'll put our breweries on our website. Please support your local microbrews. They're really struggling, in a COVID environment. So anything we can do to support them. But I'm definitely in the mood for a celebration drink after such a great interview today. Cool.
Okay, Eric, you're up. Yeah.
So this is kind of just tagging along. This is Inside EVs from last week. Former Aston Martin CEO warns local battery production is vital for the UK. So this goes with what we were talking about. Andy is pushing on putting a gigafactory in the UK. This article makes an incorrect statement. He said he was at Aston Martin and moved to Nissan. He was at Nissan for 23 years and then became CEO of Aston Martin, as he said in our interview of him. But again, we talked about it in the beginning. I won't go too repetitive. Just want to skim through this. Creating an ecosystem for next generation technology is very important for any country. Whether you're Czech Republic, as he mentioned, the United States, even Canada, all these countries, in order for you to have real value add and have control over a particular industry, you really had to have all parts of the supply chain. Given that batteries are hard to transport, given that there's going to be tariff issues between the UK and the EU potentially, having batteries made in the UK is something I fully support, given the great relationship we have in the US and the UK. So I just wanted to bring this up. Andy also had an op-ed, I think, in yesterday's Financial Times, talking a little bit about the Darwin theory, as he liked to put it, about, let's not just have government supporting one solution. And a couple of my articles today are going to address that as well. So, Lucas, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is great. I mean, we heard it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right, directly from Andy. So, it's just good to see he's kind of fighting the good fight here.
Yeah, totally. Good stuff. So pick another one and we can go with that.
How about another electric car one here?
Yeah, now this one kind of goes to the heart of what we were just talking about with the disruption, the uncertainty. I liked Andy's point about there's going to be changes, there's going to be OEMs that close, but at the end of the day, you're probably still going to have the same number with the emergence of new ones. This is Autoblog. It's picking up an Associated Press story from February 13th. Auto workers face uncertain future in era of electric cars. And it says here, GM's electric pledge might cost jobs. Not too much here to go over in terms of technical, but we do, because Lucas and I grew up in the Midwest and we saw a lot of the Rust Belt closed manufacturing jobs. We're very sensitive about this. General Motors, may have 50,000 jobs that could be in jeopardy or could evolve by 2035 when they go to their electric vehicle and zero net carbon pledge. I think this is really interesting. Obviously there's a lot of transmission workers, internal combustion engine manufacturers at the OEM level, a lot of workers in those particular factories. Will they all go away? Absolutely not. Andy's point about the hydrogen economy, synthetic fuels for performance vehicles, all of that makes sense. I think all of that has to be investigated now. But I think we need to be very cognizant about what the ramifications are when a factory closes, the impact it has not just on the local economy, but on the US economy in general. I think a lot of the political strife we have right now is the decades buildup of dislocation by good paying middle class jobs. So I think it's a great story. I totally recommend reading about it. And please, as practitioners of clean energy, let's have people in mind at all times. We're trying to improve people's lives by combating climate change, but we also want to think about positively impacting them from an economic standpoint as well.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It says here EVs contain 30 to 40% fewer moving parts. So if you think about, how many wrenches have to be turned, how many bolts have to be fastened, that's a lot less. So it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, think about the electric motor is such a self-contained unit, right? Whereas I almost suspect when motors go bad, you're going to replace the whole motor, then actually try to repair that motor. It's going to be sent to a plant and refurb somewhere. So it's just so much different than the way the mechanics will work on EVs versus ICE. So let's keep that in mind. Okay, switching gears for a second, pun intended. This is out of powertechnology.com from February 8th. Just one of those feel-good stories of a country I certainly love. South Korea plans to build 8.2 gigawatts, $43 billion offshore wind farm. I love this story for so many reasons. Okay, couple things. First off, this will be so substantial that I think they said 8.2 gigawatts is going to be the equivalent of 6 nuclear reactors.
Mm-hmm.
Most of this is private sector funded, like 42 of the 43 billion. Korea Electric Power, Hanwha, Dosan Heavy, CS Wind, Somking, SK. These are all very, very long-standing stalwart companies in South Korea. This will be the largest offshore wind farm when it gets built. Interesting, they announced this, of course, the president did, from the southwestern coastal town of Sinan. And I think that's important, and I'll talk about that in a second. But outside of this article, a little bit of research. There are 60 coal plants in South Korea right now. The government has announced on a separate basis, they're going to close 30 of those, okay, which is 40% of power generation in South Korea. Why is that important? As someone who's been to South Korea many times, both for work and because of my wife's friends and family live there, their pollution in Seoul, the largest city, is getting out of control. And the reason that's getting out of control is this horrible cocktail that takes place when you have pollution and sand from China and the Gobi Desert blowing over the sea into South Korea, into Seoul. And Seoul itself is in a bit of a valley. And so all the coal plants there have emissions that rise and meet all the pollution coming from China, and it creates this horrible cocktail pollution. South Korea is being very proactive in addressing environmental issues. They've been switching to CNG buses long before anyone talked about CNG. They recreated a river right in the middle of Seoul to help lower the temperature and improve air quality. They're doing all these great things. This is a natural, given I've been off the Korean coast many times, there's great, glorious wind. This is a great thing for South Korea. Hats off to them. Let's see more of it. Nothing new here from a technology standpoint, but just another story we want to applaud.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. 8.2 gigawatts. It's just massive. And the investment. Wow. So it'll be interesting to see, when this is up and running, what kind of impact it's going to have and what kind of changes they're going to see, with the variation of it, and if they're going to have enough storage, and what the load factor is going to be. So it'll be really interesting to see this come online.
Yeah, we're going to keep an eye on this one, especially I love your storage question. I love the fact I did a little research and I found out they're taking half the coal plants offline by 2034. That's great. We need that.
That's cool. Yes, we do.
Okay, this is a little bit of a deeper dive. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because we went so long on Andy's interview, but this is from the National Law Review. The article was actually posted on Monday, January 11th, so it's a little bit dated, but I really found this fascinating, bit of a longer read. Recommend clicking on the link and going through it. Article titled, "The EU Drive Towards a Sustainable Battery Framework and Seeing Around the Corner in the US." So I wanted to talk about this just for the headline gives it away. The EU is ahead of us in the United States and in North America on creating a battery ecosystem, but these are things we all need to be talking about. Europe doesn't just want to create batteries. They want to make sure batteries are done and created in an environmentally sustainable way. Also, they want to make sure that hazardous materials are kept to a minimum. Precious earth metals are kept to a minimum. There's going to be classifications around those. and they also want to create a robust and authentic recycling of lithium ion. So just you see bunch of bullet points here. They're going to classify batteries. They're going to make sure there's really like a second life of batteries in terms of the battery itself will be identified for repurposing early on in the battery's life, so that they're not sitting around or that they don't fit a technology that's being planned for second use batteries. They're going to be talking about a robust recycling plan, if you will, logistics plan. They're going to talk about recycled content. By 2025, they want to have a declaration of levels of recycled content in battery of, I think, 50%, if I remember. It's 70% by 2030. They're going to have a reporting system for industrial and EV batteries. They're going to be carbon footprint monitoring for the manufacturing and use and afterlife of the battery. There's going to be performance and durability, which I think is really interesting to have a performance and durability metric for the battery, because I think it mimics CAFE standards in some way. That's not something we haven't really talked about because batteries are so new and evolving. Responsible sourcing, again, talking about where you're going to get some of those precious earth metals and making sure they're not violating any social issues in any particular country. And they're going to have very, very strict information requirements. You can look at it this way, two ways. And Andy talked about this, where you can talk about the heavy hand of government over dictating. But in this particular case, I would say that this is a very, very smart thing to do, because if you start planning for the battery's future, then you start truly making it sustainable, and you take away the argument that people are creating against batteries, which is kind of the ugly sausage making of making a battery. It goes to waste. There's no plan for recycling. Yep. We've talked about companies here in North America, one in Canada is working on lithium ion recycling using some new chemical technologies. So I'm all for this. Given technology like RFID tags, there are very easy ways to track a battery to make sure they adhere to these standards. And I think we need to focus on this. So really good story. Anyone who's really interested in what's happening in Europe in batteries should read this article.
Yeah, this is great. This is a really great list of things that regulators can do that don't get in the way of markets, like you said, but make things clear, make things, sustainable, and provide the information that people need to make decisions around these, much like a nutrition label on your food. Like, I can't imagine food before nutrition labeling. Like, how could you go without that information now? You just can't. So
that's great.
Equivalent for batteries, right? So this is awesome. I love this.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That you're dead on there. So
yeah,
cool. So do I have one more? Or am I done?
No, that's it.
That's it. Awesome. Well, good stuff.
All right, here we go. So I just had a couple of quick ones here that I'm going to hit. One on utility dive that was aligned with what we were talking about with Andy. Electric vehicles could be imperfect substitutes for gas-powered cars, a new study suggests. This is from Robert Walton, February 8th. There was a study out of the Energy Policy Institute, University of Chicago, around electric car usage. And what they found, the biggest one, is that EVs are only driven about 5,300 miles annually. That's less than half for the current U.S. fleet average. And then they postulate as to why that is. And they take a pessimistic view for EVs, that EVs are viewed by drivers as complements to gasoline cars as opposed to substitute. So I don't really agree with their conclusion. I think we're still in the early adopter phase for EVs. I think people aren't really sure about EVs, or they're not buying them as their all use vehicle. There are a lot of older vehicles still in this EV fleet, our current EV fleet. So maybe they don't have the range that they're assuming. Everybody assumes every electric vehicle has the range of, Tesla's proposed numbers for 2025. They don't, they have 200 or less miles range. So, we use our EV as a get around town car, and we do put a lot of miles on it, but we don't go on long trips with it. But I think, that I would chalk it up to EVs are still relatively new. People aren't really comfortable with them yet. A lot of the EVs, say 5 years ago, that were built 5 years ago, didn't have fantastic range. EVs are being used as ICE counterparts, that's true, but they're using them as kind of get around town cars and not their, travel to the beach, travel to the lake cars. travel to the ski hill vehicles, right? They're using them as they get around town cars. So this isn't surprising to me. I don't know why they think this is news. They go into all these ideas, and he says he's going to do another study on why this is. But I think this will change too as new cars come out. I saw the new Bolt was just announced. It's going to be what, $33,900 to buy. It's got more range than the old Bolt. And it's kind of the workhorse for GM to help them roll out their EV lineup. So not really shocking. I think they kind of missed the boat, but we'll see how this evolves.
This article makes me think this publication should be called Utility Drive. Lucas sometimes called it Utility Drive, and no one called it.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
I am not ashamed of myself. Secondly, I agree with your premise on here. I do think early EVs were used as second cars. I think anyone who bought a Chevy Spark in Oregon or South San Francisco used it. You were either a young professional just starting out in an urban area, and so you only used it for your urban commute, or it was the second family car to run about town. Right. Nothing wrong with that, because if you look at an IC vehicle, the most inefficient use of it is around town. City mileage is always worse than highway mileage. So that's perfectly fine with me. If you were able to afford it, then you're an early investor. You're an early adopter, but you're also an early investor into electric vehicle industry. So I do think it's going to change and evolve. For me, when you get to what I call the full gas tank, which is 300, 400 mile range consistently, I think that's when it's really going to be mass adopted by people getting comfortable that they can get to where they can on a gas tank of gas.
Yeah. I mean, I want to see like what I would call a real hybrid that's half electric and half, say, hydrogen. So you can go 200 miles on electric, and then you have another 200 miles on hydrogen, right? Why, all these hybrids are like tiny little battery. What? That's not really what I consider a hybrid.
Hybrids, it's amazing though. I still get very upset because Toyota did a fantastic job with their hybrid with the Prius. Chevy comes out with a Volt and people lambasted it before still having a gasoline engine. But it was a great solution. It's incredible. In the wintertime, it's a great solution because you don't have degradation of total miles.
And it had a 30-mile range, which is what most people drive to work every morning, 30 miles on average.
It was 43 in the first gen and 53 in the second gen.
Yeah, so you could drive to work on all EV, charge up, drive home on all EV. You never burned gasoline. It was just a range extension.
A statistic that said like people were filling their gas tank once every 2 months as a Volt owner.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect. I'd like to see more of that. I don't know why that didn't take off like hotcakes.
Good story though. I really appreciate the story.
All right, and we have some sad news. This is from talkingbiznews.com, February 11th, from Chris Roche. Green Tech Media is closing in mid-March. So everybody who was a little concerned when Green Tech Media was taken over by Wood Mackenzie, which they classify as an oil, gas, and renewables research firm, renewables being Green Tech Media. The Green Tech Media renewable news portion of his business will be closing mid-March. So we're very sad to see you go. We were big fans. We had a lot of GTM stories on our show. Maybe we can get somebody from GTM on to tell us what happened and what's going on here. So very sad to see.
It's sad. Same thing. I've definitely used it as a source. We both have. I almost look at this as a glass half full. You almost have to wonder, Wood Mackenzie purchased it because they knew they needed to diversify into renewables.
Right.
Wood Mackenzie is a long-standing brand name forever. They may be saying to themselves, Wood Mackenzie is going to take over green reporting, green statistical analysis. It's going to be folded in. So the fact that green publications and green journalism is become so prevalent in science and business and every part of kind of American capitalism and global capitalism, it's almost telling me that you don't need to have a special publication for green because it's now becoming part of the mainstay, right? Car and Driver didn't talk about electric vehicles 15 years ago, and now they have articles about here's next year's electric vehicle rollout. There's some great publications that cover different parts of green, and I suspect that they're kind of traditional industry competitor maybe thinking about acquiring them too, because that's going to be the evolution.
Yeah. So sad to see you guys go. It looks like they're going to keep some of the things around, but yeah, very sad day for green tech.
We do a toast to green tech media.
Toast.
Toast. Well, this was about as good as it gets. We've had such a great season 3 with so many guests. The feedback on last week's guest, Dana Villanova, was incredible. The hits were incredible. So again, we want to thank you, our supporters, for continuing to support us. Great feedback. It seems like they like our style, which is scary because I've never been accused of anything stylish. So I'm happy about that, and I want to say thank you.
Yeah, so thanks to all our listeners. Please tell your friends about us. They can find us in their favorite podcast site. You just search for Pirates of Clean Tech in your favorite podcast site, and you can click the subscribe or follow button, and then it'll come into your app on your iPhone, and you'll be all good. We are on Apple Podcasts, which is our #1 site. We're also on YouTube, so you can find us there. You hit subscribe, and then you got to click the alarm bell, and it notifies you when our new episodes are up.
And you can see we have kind of matching outfits on today, right? So,
all right, smile when you say the disclaimer, Eric.
Yes, and by the way, the views and opinions expressed by Lucas and I on the Pirates of Clean Tech are solely ours and not necessarily of any organizations that we are affiliated with.
Yeah,
can't believe Andy didn't like our yar. What do British pirates say?
That's what I want to know. What does the British pirate say?
That sounds like a children's joke, right?
Oh, I mean, doesn't he watch Pirates of the Caribbean? I don't know.
Yeah, well, he'll claim that's just American entertainment propaganda.
Swashbuckling sounds. Here we go. I don't know.
What
should I ask him?
We'll have to ask him. So we're running really long, so we should probably wrap this up so people can go to bed.
Okay.
We've already driven them to sleep.
Come on, they still got to walk the dog another mile or two. Come on.
Yeah, they still got to fold the laundry, right? We got to go out there and fold the laundry. Get those whites out of the dryer.
All right, I'm Lucas Finko.
And I'm Eric Planey, and we are Pirates of Clean Tech. Yar.
Yarg.
Yar.
Yeah. Yo ho ho.
Is that British?
I don't know.